Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive, quite literally, into one of the strangest habits of ancient Rome. Picture this: cobbled streets, flickering torchlight, and the sharp, unmistakable tang of ammonia. You're walking down a narrow, Roman alley at dusk, the kind where laundry hangs above your head like sleepy flags. Somewhere nearby you hear the slosh of water, or rather, not water. Someone stirring a bucket with a paddle. And no, it's not soup. That smell, that's someone doing laundry. But instead of detergent, they're using urine. Human urine. On purpose. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere interesting or at an odd hour, drop a comment below with your city and what time it is. You'd be surprised how global this little sleepy corner of YouTube has become. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're strolling through the Suburra district, Rome's lively, grimy, chaotically human neighborhood. The kind of place where senators might step over drunks on their way to the Forum. And it's here, nestled between taverns and brothels, that you find one of the oldest philoniki or laundries. No one stops you as you step through the low doorway. It smells like vinegar and sweat and something else you can't quite place. A man is ankle-deep in a vat, stomping rhythmically like he's making wine, except the liquid is pale yellow. His face is calm. A job like any other. In Rome, urine wasn't waste, it was currency, a resource, a cleaning agent. They didn't just tolerate the smell, they relied on it. That jug outside the door, it's a public collection jar. People relieve themselves in it so the laundry can function. Public urinals weren't just for convenience, they were the supply chain. And no, there were no disclaimers or do not ingest warnings. You pause beside a drying line of togas, flapping like tired ghosts. The cloth is bright white, shockingly. So that's the point. Romans prized the appearance of clean linen. A fresh toga was like a power tie, a spotless reputation made wearable. Of course, behind every spotless toga was a guy with wet feet and a nose long past caring. Historians still debate exactly when the practice began, but by the 1st century CE it was well established. The philosopher Seneca wrote about fullers, what we'd call launderers, with a kind of detached amusement. These men soaked, scrubbed, stomped, rinsed and dried garments, all while surrounded by the pungent perfume of Roman industry. What's wild is that it worked. Urine contains ammonia, and ammonia is excellent at breaking down grease and dirt. Even modern science backs this up. If it weren't so smelly and, well, people might still be using it today. You imagine yourself trying to explain this to your dry cleaner. No starch, thanks. Just the usual vat of fermented pee. There's something charming about how practical the Romans were. No squeamishness, no moral fuss. If it worked, it worked. Urine wasn't just for laundry either. They used it in tanning leather, bleaching wool, even brushing their teeth. Though you're allowed to be grateful that particular trend didn't last. 1. Roman poet joked that kissing someone with sparkling white teeth meant they were probably scrubbing with Portuguese urine. Apparently, Iberian pee was considered especially high quality. Imagine importing that. Tonight, you stand at the edge of this ancient vat, the air heavy with the scent of centuries. The man in the vat smiles at you and goes back to his work. The slap of his feet against soaked fabric becomes a kind of lullaby. Even in a city of marble and conquest, somebody had to do the laundry. Tomorrow, your toga will gleam. You'll stride through the Forum like a senator, all because someone else spent the evening ankle-deep in yesterday's bathroom break. And that's just how Rome worked. You take a few slow steps deeper into the Fullonica, careful not to slip on the slick stone floor. Everything glistens faintly in the low light, from the rows of large sunken tubs to the tools hanging on pegs along the wall. Wooden paddles, brushes made from animal hair, and thick gloves coated with years of ammonia-stained use. A single oil lamp flickers from the corner, casting golden reflections off damp walls. You pause near one of the tubs. It's still warm. A man with sleeves rolled up to his shoulders is wringing out a sodden tunic. The water drips back into the vat with a lazy rhythm. He hums as he works, something repetitive and oddly calming, like the drip of rain on tile. This isn't a side hustle. This is a craft. The journey from the latrine to this very tub is surprisingly well organized. Across Rome, people relieve themselves in public urinals or donate their chamber pots to neighborhood collection stations. Then, every day or two, workers known as urinatores, yes, really, gather the containers and cart them to laundries like this. There's an actual economic chain here. You begin to realize how formalized this system was. Urine wasn't random waste, it was traded, tracked, taxed. Some of it came from public toilets built specifically for collection, with open-bottomed jars designed for easy pouring. Others came from bathhouses, where large crowds meant steady supply. You wonder how many awkward moments there were when a dinner party guest excused themselves, only to have their contribution collected the next morning by a guy in sandals and a donkey cart. The collected urine didn't go straight into use. It had to ferment first. Yes, ferment, like wine or kimchi or bad decisions. Left to sit in vats for a few days, the urea in the urine broke down into ammonia, giving it that signature sting. Once it reached peak potency, it was poured into the foot tubs, and the real work began. And that's where the full-ons came in. These guys weren't just sloshing garments around like bored toddlers in a kiddie pool. There was a method to their madness. Stomping to agitate the cloth, kneading to loosen dirt, even singing to keep rhythm, because nothing says teamwork like belting out a chorus while ankle-deep in a vat of someone else's bathroom byproduct. There's something almost meditative about it. You watch one man squeeze and twist a tunic like he's milking a giant fabric cow. His hands are calloused, his expression serene. You can't help but smile. Somehow in this room of sharp smells and repetitive movements, there's a strange peace. Some Fuloniki even had second rooms with hot stones for pressing and reshaping garments. Others offered perfume dips for the wealthier clients, an attempt perhaps to disguise where the garment had just been. Of course, some customers didn't care. They just wanted results. A toga so white it could blind. A tunic that didn't smell like the back end of a donkey. Still, not everyone approved of the process. There were jokes, plenty of them. Roman satirists were relentless. One poem compared fullers to alchemists, men who turned filth into gold, or at least into fabric, respectable enough to wear to court. Another mocked the absurdity of aristocrats obsessing over cleanliness, while relying on the dirtiest methods to get there. And, as always, historians still debate whether the Romans truly preferred this method for cleanliness, or simply lacked better alternatives. You look around again. The place is quiet, save for the soft squish of wet cloth and the occasional snort from a dozing mule tied out back. It's easy to forget that this room, this rank little chamber tucked into a side street, was once the beating heart of Roman hygiene. The laundry business was no joke. Fullers could gain social status, financial stability, even legal protections. Some banded together into guilds and took pride in their work, crafting crests and rituals, and even lobbying the government. You imagine a town hall meeting filled with men smelling faintly of ammonia, passionately debating toga-folding techniques. There's pride in that kind of detail, in knowing your hands keep the city crisp one toga at a time. You let your fingers brush the edge of a drying cloth, still damp, still carrying the ghost of its journey. It's strange, isn't it? How even the most elegant civilizations have a secret underbelly of filth and effort, of laboring feet and sour buckets behind the marble columns. And Rome, glorious Rome, built its beauty on top of barrels like these. You lean back against a stone ledge, letting the ambient warmth of the room soak into your shoulders. Outside, the city might still be bustling, carts creaking, sandals clacking, someone shouting about figs. But in here, it's just the rhythmic sound of cloth being scrubbed against itself. Soothing like distant waves. Tonight you're not a senator or a merchant or even a curious wanderer. You're simply another pair of eyes watching the most undervalued miracle of the Roman world, a profession where cleanliness rose from the dirtiest places. The Fulons, the Roman launderers, were an odd bunch. Somewhere between blue-collar laborers and low-key chemical engineers, They developed a reputation as both essential and mildly ridiculous. After all, they made their living with their feet, not their hands, and their primary tool, a substance you normally flush away and never think about again. Yet despite the pungent conditions, being a fuller wasn't the bottom of the social barrel. In fact, it was a real job, with real clients, and in some cases, real respect. You think, back to that shopkeeper you passed earlier in the day. His toga crisp, its folds perfect, its color so aggressively white it practically glowed. He paid for that. Someone in this room probably stomped his garment into submission this morning. There were hundreds of Pholonicae scattered across the empire, from Rome to Pompeii, from Hispania to North Africa. And they weren't small operations. The Pholonicae. Stephanie in Pompeii, for example, was massive, with multiple vats, pressing rooms, and even a space for airing clothes in sunlight. It was more industrial than some modern dry cleaners, and while the work was smelly and strenuous, it came with certain perks. Fullers often lived on site, had steady employment, and sometimes even inherited their master's clientele. A skilled fuller could set up his own shop, maybe hire a few apprentices, and eventually pass the trade to his son. Imagine the family dinner conversations. "How was work today, Dad?" "Same as always, son. 7 tunics, 2 cloaks, and a senator's. Toga that smelled like anxiety. And the tools of the trade, oh, they were varied. You had your large dolia, those deep vats, your pressing stones, your drying racks, and your collection of additives. Besides urine, they used fuller's earth, a type of clay that helped strip oils from fabric, sometimes ashes or lime, sometimes even herbs if the customer was fancy or the stain particularly stubborn. And if you think there wasn't a hierarchy, think again. Some fullers specialized in wool, others only did togas, some handled the laundry. Of brothels, less about appearance, more about odor control. And then there were those who claimed to be whitening experts, the ancient equivalent of stain removal gurus. They probably charged extra. What's funny is how much pride they took in their craft. In Pompeii, a mosaic was discovered in the entry of a Phulonica. It showed a man working at a vat, smiling, a little cartoon of labor, immortalized in tile. You get the sense that these people didn't just tolerate their work, they embraced it, celebrated it. And in the end, it gave them stability in a city that rarely promised such things. Of course, their clients rarely returned the favor. Wealthy Romans loved the results but scoffed at the methods. It was a kind of polite hypocrisy, the same way some modern diners rave about organic eggs, but would faint if they saw the chicken coop. Even so, the fullers thrived. By the early imperial era, they'd even organized into professional guilds. They had leaders, meeting spaces, rituals. One surviving inscription references a president of the Guild of Fullers, a title that surely carried both pride and the faint aroma of yesterday's tunic. Historians still puzzle over how formalized the system truly was. Some say fullers were just independent contractors scraping by. Others believe they were highly integrated into Rome's economic fabric. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. Soaked, stomped, wrung out, and hung to dry, you pie. Notice a young apprentice in the corner, carefully folding a clean tunic. He pauses to inspect the seam, smoothing a wrinkle with practiced fingers. He doesn't look disgusted. He looks focused and content. It's hard not to admire that. In a world where ambition often meant betrayal and power came with a knife. In the back, the Fullones kept their heads down and their linens up. They didn't need titles, they had technique. And in a way, you start to envy them. Not the smell, maybe, but the clarity, the routine, the satisfaction of seeing something filthy become something bright one stamp at a time. The scent of heated stone and drying cloth clings to you now. Not unpleasant exactly, just honest. The kind of smell that reminds you someone somewhere is working hard, likely barefoot and humming, to make sure someone else looks presentable. You follow the apprentice out into the back courtyard of the Phulonica, where rows of garments sway gently on stretched cords. The breeze carries with it the faintest trace of citrus. Someone must have added lemon balm to the rinse today, one of the little luxuries that only paying clients receive. In the center of the courtyard, a man is standing beside a steaming basin. He waves a small brush like a conductor, scrubbing. A particularly stubborn stain from a senator's ceremonial sash. His technique is precise, almost artistic. Not all laundry is equal, after all. Some garments carry politics in their folds. This is where you meet a typical fuller. Let's call him Lucius. His tunic is short, his legs muscular from years of stepping and squatting, his nose long defeated. Lucius doesn't smell anything anymore. He simply knows when the mixture is ripe. He starts his day before dawn. First, he checks the vats, fermentation levels, color, consistency. You might test your coffee's aroma in the morning. Lucius checks ammonia strength, priorities. Then come the garments. Sorted by material, by level of filth, by whether or not the client is the type to bribe you for extra starch. Silk, be gentle. Wool, work fast. Toga, treat it like the emperor might see it, because someone always tells the emperor. Lucius works by memory. No labels, no spreadsheets. He can look at a sleeve and tell you who it belongs to, what the man does for a living, and whether he's paid his last 3 laundry bills. He isn't just cleaning clothes. He's navigating social hierarchies. Once the garments are soaked and scrubbed, they're rinsed with clean water. Yes, they do rinse them, and then wrung out with practiced strength. Finally, they're brushed, reshaped, and hung to dry. Each item must look freshly pressed without the benefit of an iron. Instead, Lucius uses hot stones wrapped in cloth, pressing carefully along the creases. You watch as he folds a toga into perfect pleats with the skill of a sculptor. There's almost a reverence to it, as if he's handling a sacred relic instead of something that smelled like a goat yesterday. And there's chatter, of course. The Fulonica is a hub of gossip. While your toga gets cleaned, your secrets get aired. Apprentices hear everything. Who's sleeping with whom? Which senator was caught buying knockoff olive oil? Which baker's wife is mysteriously pregnant again? In fact, it's rumored that some fullers could make a decent side income selling gossip. To the curious and the cunning. Knowledge is power, and power gets dirty just like everything else. Lucius doesn't speak much. He doesn't need to. His work speaks for him. The sharp creases, the subtle sheen. The way even a poor man's tunic leaves looking slightly wealthier. But he does chuckle when you ask him if he minds the smell. What smell? He says. You believe him. There's something admirable about a life so grounded. Lucius doesn't chase politics or poetry. He doesn't own land, but he's never short of work. Rain or shine, feast or famine, someone needs their clothes cleaned. And in a city of marble, it turns out the most dependable pillars are the men with wrinkled hands and strong calves. Historians still discuss whether the fullers were respected craftsmen or merely tolerated laborers. The truth, as ever, is layered, like a toga wrapped 3 times around a sweating torso. In some regions they were honored, in others mocked, but everywhere they were necessary, and necessity has a way of building its own kind of dignity. As you watch Lucius hang the last tunic of the day, his silhouette outlined against the fading sun, you realize something. Rome wasn't built by emperors alone. It was built by people like this, stomping, scrubbing, folding, and rinsing behind the scenes, and maybe that's what makes this city so unforgettable. Not just the triumphal arches or glittering baths, but the quiet rhythm of people like Lucius turning stink into sparkle. You linger in the courtyard as twilight settles. The sky over Rome melts into bruised purples and dusky orange, casting long shadows between the drying lines. There's a faint sound of sandals brushing stone, the occasional splash from a distant vat and the comforting creak of linen swaying on ropes. Lucius is gone now, his shift over. A younger fuller has taken his place, organizing soiled garments for the next day. You watch as he hesitates over a particularly soiled tunic, hesitation not from disgust, but from recognition. This isn't just any garment. This one belongs to a man of some importance. It's a reminder that laundry is never truly anonymous in Rome, which brings you to the science behind the smell. The thing is, the Romans weren't just winging it when they used urine. They had actual chemical logic, long before chemistry was a thing. Human urine contains urea, which, when left to sit for a few days, breaks down into ammonia. Ammonia is an alkaline compound that cuts through grease and dirt like magic. Today, you might see ammonia-based cleaner on a bottle under your sink. Back then, the label would have read, "Jug of wee best when aged." You probably wouldn't put that on a commercial. Or maybe you would. The Romans had a very flexible sense of advertising. There's even evidence that different types of urine were preferred for different tasks. Urine from men was supposedly stronger. Urine from goats? Terrible. Children's urine, now that was the deluxe version, said to be gentler on delicate fabrics. You wonder how someone discovered that. Probably not on purpose. And don't forget, the collection system. This wasn't an amateur operation. Rome had pea routes. Licensed urinatories would pick up containers from homes and public toilets and deliver them to fullers or tanners, depending on who paid better. You could even lease out collection jars if you had a good spot near a bathhouse. Yes, you could be a landlord of pee. That brings you to one of the most curious quirks of Roman civilization, the urine tax. In the 1st century CE, Emperor Vespasian, ever the pragmatist, instituted a tax on urine collection. Public urinals, called Fulanicae Vespasiani, became taxable sources of revenue. It wasn't the liquid itself being taxed, but the act of collecting and selling it for commercial use. Naturally, some folks weren't happy. When Vespasian's son Titus complained about the idea of taxing something so foul, the emperor famously held a coin up to his nose and asked, "Does it smell?" When Titus shook his head, Vespasian replied, "And yet it comes from urine. Pecunia non olet," he said. "Money doesn't stink." The phrase has survived for nearly 2 millennia, proof that even the worst-smelling decisions can age well if they bring in enough cash. You smile at that. Only in Rome would a bodily function become a taxable commodity, a public utility, and the basis of a philosophical zinger all at once. Historians still debate just how widespread the practice was. Some believe the urine tax applied only to the city of Rome, while others argue it was a general policy across the empire. Like many Roman laws, it was probably inconsistently enforced and enthusiastically ignored. Still, the fact that the empire's cleanliness partially depended on such a substance is a testament to their practicality. They weren't squeamish, they were solution-driven. They looked at a puddle and thought, how can I profit from this? And you have to admire that. As the young fuller finishes sorting, he covers the vats with wooden lids, tying them down with rope. A cat slips across the stones, tail high, perhaps hoping for scraps or simply enjoying the heat still radiating from the tiles. You follow it with your eyes and think, in a city this grand, even the alleys have purpose. Rome was an empire of marble, yes, but it was also an empire of buckets. And in those buckets, they didn't just clean fabric. They laundered ambition, reputation, and the scent of daily life. You rise from your perch, brushing imaginary dust from your tunic as if you too had spent the day among vats and steam. The Fulanica's stone arch frames your exit, and as you step back onto the cobbled street, the noises of Rome resume. A distant shout from a tavern, the soft bray of a donkey, someone laughing far too loudly for how late it is. You follow a narrow path that leads you toward the public latrines. You've heard of them, latrini as the Romans called them. And since you've now learned where the Fulanica's raw materials originate, it feels only fair to pay a visit to the source. At first, it's hard to believe you've arrived at a toilet. There's no smell, no filth, just a long marble bench, carved with evenly spaced circular holes, resting above a gentle flow of water. Another channel of water runs in front of the bench, and a basket of long-handled sponges sits nearby. Yes, sponges. We'll come back to that. You approach with curiosity. The air here is cooler, cleaner than you expected. A mosaic of sea creatures decorates the wall, a strangely cheerful place for relieving oneself. But this was the Roman way. Hygiene, dignity, and civic participation all rolled into one very communal experience. Because here's the catch, there were no stalls, just a bench. You sit beside strangers, make conversation, pass the time. Politicians might hash out policy here. Bakers might swap flour tips. Old men might retell the same joke they told yesterday. The latrine was more than functional. It was social. A city-sized game of don't look sideways. And here, of course, is where the Fullone's day begins. Beneath the latrine runs a clever aqueduct-fed system that flushes waste away continuously. But some of it is diverted and collected. Urine, in particular, drains into specialized containers where it can ferment before being hauled away. Rome was one of the first civilizations to combine sanitation with resource management. While other cultures discarded their waste, Rome repurposed it. Efficient, inventive, slightly gross. You think about the logistics. Every day, hundreds, maybe thousands of people contribute to the empire's cleaning industry simply by answering nature's call. Some public urinals even bore inscriptions inviting you to donate generously. You smile. Of course they did. And now, about those sponges. Each visitor to the latrina used a communal sponge on a stick, called a tersorium. After wiping, the sponge was rinsed in the front channel of water and left for the next user. Hygienic, not by modern standards, but in a time before paper or plumbing, it was a marvel of engineering. One ancient writer complained that the sponge was sometimes used with too much enthusiasm, which raises uncomfortable questions you decide not to dwell on before bed. Still, there's a kind of harmony here. Waste becomes utility. Conversation happens over the most mundane of tasks. Cleanliness is not a solitary effort, it's collective. And in a world where survival depends on cooperation, the latrina was where divides disappeared. Everyone sits down the same way. Historians still puzzle over whether Romans truly preferred these communal spaces or simply accepted them as part of city life. Were they comfortable? Were there unspoken rules? Was there a best seat? One thing is certain. The Fuloniki couldn't have existed without them. So as you rise and step away from the bench, politely nodding to an imaginary senator, seated beside you, you begin to see Rome not just as a city of grandeur, but as a vast machine of small, strange efficiencies. Every splash, every stomp, every pail of fermented liquid had its place, and in this great engine of civilization, even the latrine had prestige. You head back down the alley, now quieter than before. The air has cooled, the marble glows in moonlight, and in the distance you can just barely hear the echo of feet in a vat, someone starting the night shift, because in Rome cleanliness never sleeps. As the quiet of the night deepens, your steps draw you toward the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, the beating underbelly of the empire. You'd heard of it before, maybe from a tour guide's whisper or a dusty schoolbook. But standing, near its ancient mouth, where water gurgles endlessly into darkness, it feels more like a living creature than a system of stone. This was no simple ditch. The Cloaca Maxima was an architectural marvel, one of the oldest pieces of Roman engineering, and still in use centuries after it was built. Originally just a drainage canal, it grew into a vast underground network, channeling rainwater runoff and human waste out of the city and into the Tiber. It hums with purpose, with history, and with just the faintest hint of ammonia in the air, because this wasn't just about getting rid of filth. Rome, with its hundreds of Fulonicae, had another motive. They needed a steady flow of the right kind of waste to fuel their industries. And so the sewers weren't just disposal, they were redirection. Some sections of the Cloaca Maxima connected directly to public urinals or bathhouses, which in turn fed into cisterns or collection pools. A clever system of gates and slopes allowed for diversion. Need more fermented urea? Just open the right channel. Too much? Let the river have the rest. You crouch by the edge and listen. The water's movement is slow and oddly soothing, like the world's oldest lullaby. This too is Rome. Not just triumphal arches and eagle standards, but pipes, flows, and humble stink. There's an old saying, now mostly forgotten: the empire smells like the cloaca, but it's clean like the gods. No one's sure who said it. Could have been a satirist, could have been a fuller with a sense of humor. Either way, it speaks a truth that lingers through centuries. The smell of Rome, sour, fermented, metallic, isn't just a side effect. It's part of the function. It's the price of order. Because without this subterranean orchestra, nothing above ground would sparkle. You remember walking past the Temple of Vesta earlier, its polished steps gleaming like they were carved from milk. Or the Senate House, with its giant doors and polished floor. You wonder now how many of those senators' togas were stomped clean in ammonia a few streets away. How many imperial robes hung to dry beside clothes from a baker or an innkeeper. This city was a constant exchange of smells and status. You step away from the sewer mouth, careful not to disturb the cat who's found a warm perch nearby. The air here isn't foul, not really. It's just honest. It smells like things that used to be dirty, now redirected, cleaned, or used for something else. There's even a faint floral note, maybe from a nearby laundry that uses lavender in its rinse. Historians still argue about how centralized Rome's sanitation truly was. Was it a grand design or an accidental brilliance? Were the connections between sewer and industry planned, or just exploited over time? Like much of Roman life, it was probably a bit of both. Intention layered with improvisation, marble balanced on mud. And as strange as it sounds, it worked. You imagine what it must have been like centuries ago to walk these streets not as a visitor, but as someone who lived this system, who saw a leaking pipe and thought, more fuel for the fullers, who passed a urine jar and tipped a few coins in out of civic duty, who knew that what you flush away today becomes someone's white toga tomorrow, because in Rome, filth and function lived side by side. And the city, through its strange symphony of pipes, pails, and patient workers, sang ever onward. You follow the faint glint of torchlight through a winding alley, and suddenly you're back where this strange story began, the Fullernica. But this time, you're not watching the tubs. You're headed toward a quieter corner, where fabric is brushed, scented, and left to dry in delicate folds. This is the finishing room, where the stink gives way to sweetness, and the magic of transformation truly completes its cycle. It's almost serene here. The stone walls have been darkened by years of steam and smoke, but they reflect the flicker of oil lamps gently, casting soft shadows on linen-draped forms. There's a kind of beauty to it all. Clean lines, neat bundles, order emerging from chaos. You approach a low table where a bundle of freshly laundered garments rests. A girl, barefoot, probably 15, leans over them with a brush in hand. She's not scrubbing but stroking, gently, purposefully. Each pass of the brush smooths the fibers, flattens stray threads, and gives the fabric that signature Roman crispness. This isn't about function anymore, it's presentation. Even in ancient Rome, fashion mattered. A white toga wasn't just clothing, it was a statement. About class, status, even morality. A pristine toga suggested discipline, honor, and civic virtue. A dirty one, laziness, disrespect, possibly treason if you wore the wrong outfit into the wrong assembly. So these finishing touches. They could make or break a reputation. Some garments are soaked in scented water, usually lavender, rosemary, or crushed bay leaves. Not cheap. But if you've just paid to have your toga cleaned in fermented pee, you might as well splurge a little to make it smell like anything else. And this is where things get surprisingly luxurious. You wouldn't think so, standing in a room where, hours ago, someone was stomping in yesterday's bathwater. But now, there are whispers of elegance, clean tunics folded just so, gold thread shimmering faintly on an embroidered hem, a piece of silk imported from the East, laid delicately over a drying rack like a lazy smile. You run your fingers over a toga's edge. It's warm, still holding the sun from the afternoon drying. Soft, too. Not what you'd expect from wool. Nearby, a fuller pours a pale liquid from a clay jug, perfumed rinse diluted with honey water. He dips a cloth into it and gently presses it against the shoulders of a senator's garment. It's not for cleaning. It's for softness, for scent, for prestige. Historians still debate just how obsessed the Romans were with smell. Some argue it was central to their culture. Others say it was only the elite who fussed over fragrances. But the archaeological evidence, jars, oils, scented cloths, suggests a broader appeal. Smell mattered. It could cover your tracks, elevate your station, impress a dinner guest. And in a world where most people lived very close to one another, your odor was your calling card. There's a small table in the corner, lined with jars. Some hold powder, chalk and clay mixtures for whitening. Others are filled with resin, wax, or even crushed flowers. The girl from earlier dabs her fingers in one jar, then pats it gently onto a cloak, a kind of primitive dryer sheet. It's humbling, really. This much care, this much effort, all for laundry. Not art, not sculpture, not war, just fabric. Washed, stomped, brushed and perfumed, and yet it touches everyone, from the butcher's apprentice to the emperor himself. Even Julius Caesar, in all his glory, once stood in a finishing room like this, his toga laid flat, waiting to be folded, scented, and carried back to the palace. You wonder if he noticed. Probably not. But the fuller did. You look around this little room once more, the quiet concentration, the gentle brush strokes, the faint smells of lavender and lanolin. And beneath it all, the knowledge that just hours ago, every piece of fabric in here was soaked in something far less romantic. It's transformation. Alchemy, almost filth, becomes pride. And Rome marches on, scented, pressed and polished. Outside, the sky is velvet black, stitched with stars. Rome doesn't sleep, not really, but it softens. You walk slowly now, the sound of your footsteps mingling with the rustle of laundry lines still swaying in the breeze. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, but even that feels sleepy, like an afterthought. You turn onto a quieter street and find yourself in front of a small shop, a simple wooden sign swinging above the door, etched with a laurel wreath and a tunic. This is a high-end fullonica, the kind that caters to the very top of society. And while the tubs and vats remain, it's the customers here that make the difference. You step inside. The air is rich with the smell of warmed fabric and a hint of rose oil. A man in a finely belted tunic is examining a row of garments laid out for inspection. You recognize him, not from real life, of course, but from a marble bust you once saw in a museum. He's a senator, the kind who debates grain imports and praises Jupiter in the same breath. He lifts a toga, inspects the hem, nods once, approves. This shop doesn't just launder clothes, it curates appearances. And in Rome, image was everything. Even the color. White, such a simple thing, was a battlefield. The toga candidata, reserved for politicians seeking office, had to be unnaturally, aggressively white. Not regular white, not laundered once or twice white. No, this was I bathe in milk and light itself white. And how did they achieve that? You already know the answer. First, urine, fermented to a fine vintage. Then, clay and chalk powders, massaged deep into the folds. Some togas were even soaked in sulfur fumes to enhance the brightness. You'd think this might damage the fabric, but to a Roman, optics outweighed longevity. It's the ancient equivalent of dry cleaning. A suit before every Instagram photo. There's a young man here, maybe 18, his sandals too new to be comfortable. He stands stiffly as an attendant smooths the folds of his toga. This is his first time wearing the candidacy white. You can tell by the way he's trying to look unimpressed, but secretly fears sneezing in it. One clumsy movement, and he'll smell like ammonia for a week. Nearby, a woman waits by a polished bronze mirror as her maid inspects the pleats of her stola. She's wearing a garland of violets, probably to mask any lingering scent from the cleansing process. It almost works. And then there's the quiet one in the back. A dancer by the look of her. Her silk is sheer, dyed with saffron, and she waits patiently while her stage costume is unrolled and fluffed. Even the performers, especially the performers, needed their clothes to speak before they did. Because in Rome you don't just wear clothing, you declare your identity with it. Historians still debate whether the average Roman cared about these distinctions, or if they were mostly enforced by elites. But the archaeological record shows a surprising level of textile care even among the lower classes. Tunics were patched neatly, dyed when faded, and stored carefully. Clothing wasn't disposable. It was currency, and laundering wasn't optional. It was part of maintaining your place in the world. A dirty tunic could cost you a client, a marriage, or a trial verdict. Appearances were that powerful. You step back outside, the weight of this, realization settling in like the night air. It's easy to forget how much work goes into looking effortless. How many feet stomped, how many hands brushed, how many barrels of pee fermented quietly in courtyards, just so someone could walk into a Senate chamber and pretend they woke up spotless. And yet, there's something beautiful in that ridiculously. Indar, first city of conquest, opulence, and gods, One of the greatest status symbols was a clean piece of fabric, and behind every clean hem, someone with strong calves and no sense of smell. You leave the high-end Follonica behind and wander further into the belly of the city, where the buildings lean in just a bit tighter. The torches burn a little dimmer, and the conversations get more colourful. You've entered the working class. Quarters now. A different Rome, still proud, still bustling, but with tunics a little rougher and sandals a little more worn. And still, the laundry lines stretch across alleyways like sleepy spiderwebs, because cleanliness wasn't only a patrician obsession. In fact, everyone in Rome had to care about how they looked. Even in the lowest ranks, a fresh tunic could mean a fresh start. You round a corner and come across a humbler Follonica, smaller and louder. Inside, a couple of fullers are arguing about whether wool dries better in moonlight or under clay tiles. Another is scrubbing something with a brush that looks like it's been passed down through 3 generations and 1 civil war. You pause by the entrance, watching the clientele trickle in, a tavern owner dropping off his aprons, a gladiator's trainer cradling a pile of blood-stained tunics like newborn puppies, and a woman, tall, confident, with a tiny girl clutching her hand, offering a bundle wrapped in cloth. The shop's smell is sharper here, less lavender, more labour, but the care, still there. You watch as the fullers set to work. The gladiator's tunics go straight to the yi. Strong-armed one, he scrapes the worst of the stains with a flat bone blade, muttering under his breath about those boys always bleeding on laundry day. He doesn't seem annoyed, more like amused, familiar, and that's the thing. Here, laundry isn't just a service, it's a ritual, a rhythm. You dirty it, they clean it, you pay, they fold, and in doing so, everyone pretends that maybe this week they're a little more put together than the week before. Even in the brothels, especially in the brothels, clothing mattered. You think of the dyed dresses, the perfumed scarves, the carefully embroidered girdles, garments that whispered promises and hinted at wealth. They needed to be spotless by nightfall, even if they'd be wrinkled again by midnight. And the laundries didn't judge. A coin was a coin. A stain was a stain. Whether you were senator or streetwalker, your tunic got the same treatment. If anything, the lower classes were more creative with fabric care. They made their own rinses, used crushed beans for scrubbing, even invented tricks with salt and vinegar that would make a modern cleaning blog blush. Some fullers, it said, even offered overnight specials. If you dropped your clothes off before curfew, they'd stomp through the night by torchlight, singing quietly to keep each other awake. The city never truly slept, after all. Why should the laundry? Historians still dig into how these small businesses operated, whether they were independently run or tied to larger patronage systems. Some inscriptions suggest fullers were freed slaves who built successful ventures. Others hint at wives and daughters helping behind the scenes, turning a man's trade into a family affair. You like that image, a mother folding togas while a toddler stomps one-footed in a bucket nearby, giggling at the splash, because in this Rome, everyone plays a part, even in the margins. And you begin to notice Rome's strength wasn't just its architecture or armies, it was its networks, its interlocking systems, the silent contracts between worker and client, sweat and fabric, stink and status. You lean against the doorframe and breathe in, not deeply, of course, just enough to feel part of something strange, ancient, and incredibly human, a city that wore its pride in layers further into the maze and laundered Rome, each one carefully, your feet guided now more by instinct than map. The city is quieter here, the bustle thinning into murmurs, and the flickering torchlight casting the streets in a kind of whispered gold. You follow a gently curving alley that opens into a small plaza, tucked between shrines and shuttered wine shops. There, barely noticeable, is another doorway, arched and low, carved with 2 words, Follonica Feliculae. This one's different. Older, worn, it smells faintly of wax and camphor and something sweetly bitter, like aged oil or forgotten incense. Inside you find not the clatter of tubs or the slap of soaked wool, but stillness, silence almost. This is a specialty laundry, one that caters to those not just in need of clean clothes, but clean appearances. The woman who runs it, Felicula, is seated cross-legged on a woven mat, polishing the hem of a ceremonial garment with a soft brush made from sheep's hair. Her fingers are thin, practiced, her posture unbending. These aren't tunics from gladiators or senators. These are costumes, the sacred stolas of Vestal virgins, the white-bordered robes of augurs, the crimson-edged garments of lictors and priests. Rome, as it turns out, wasn't just obsessed with hygiene, it was obsessed with ritual purity, and clothes, clean, unstained, and properly prepared, were part of that ritual. Follicula doesn't look up as you watch her work. Her assistants move like shadows, placing garments on racks arranged by dye, fabric, and function. One girl carefully steams a thin linen veil over a basin of hot water mixed with myrrh. Another smooths wrinkles from a ceremonial sash with a bone tool, whispering a prayer under her breath. You're beginning to understand that laundry in Rome wasn't just about dirt. It was about symbolism. To wear unwashed garments to a sacrifice, disrespectful to the gods, to let the hem of your stola trail in filth during a procession, a sign of inner decay, to appear before a magistrate with a stain on your toga. Practically, an admission of guilt. So Folonicae, like folliculas, were more than businesses. They were gatekeepers of public perception. You might lie in court, you might fake an omen, but your toga, that spoke the truth, plain and white. Even children's clothing had meaning. Young boys wore the toga praetexta, edged in purple, until they came of age. On their coming of manhood day, those togas were laundered with special herbs, bay leaves, mint, rosemary, and folded in ritual silence. The fullers who did this were paid handsomely, but not everyone got paid. Sometimes laundering sacred garments was seen as offering, not service. A kind of civic devotion through suds and steam. Follicula, you suspect, doesn't charge the Vestals. She just nods when they leave, her hands scented with rose oil and silence. Historians still argue about whether this sacred laundering was widespread or limited to Rome's elite religious centers. Some evidence suggests it happened in provincial temples too, perhaps in smaller ways. A priest's robe aired out by moonlight, a sacred sash rinsed in river water before the equinox. It makes you wonder, did the gods care about the smell? Probably not, but the Romans did. And in a world where the divine might judge you on posture, poise, or the crease of your sleeve, you didn't take chances. You take a step backward, careful not to disrupt the quiet flow of motion. Follicula looks up briefly, just enough to catch your gaze and nod. A moment of recognition. You nod back, unsure whether to bow or simply leave. Better not to risk it, because if this city has taught you anything tonight, it's that every thread is threaded with meaning. Every stain is a story, every garment a ritual, and somewhere, behind the curtain of incense and wool, Rome hums with quiet ceremony. Even the gods, it seems, expect your best whites. As you step back into the open air, the scent of myrrh and boiled cloth clinging faintly to your cloak, Rome greets you with the hush of midnight. The streets are emptier now, the shadows longer. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre player strums, a slow tune, and a pair of drunk poets argue softly about Virgil's metaphors. You follow a quieter street now, narrower than the rest, its stones warm beneath your soles. And here you stumble upon something rare, a home-based Follonica, a family-run operation, unlicensed, modest, and quietly ingenious. It's barely a storefront, just a beaded curtain and a sign painted directly onto the wall. Laundry, fast, fair, discreet. Inside you find a woman hunched over a low basin, her sleeves rolled, her hair bound tightly in a scarf. Her two children stomp rhythmically in clay tubs nearby, laughing with every splash. She looks up, smiles. No pretense here, just business. This is the backbone of Roman laundry culture, the unofficial Folonies, the women and men, freed slaves, and day laborers who laundered for neighbors, tenants, and the occasional high-traffic brothel. They worked with scraps, reused water, home-fermented urine, soap made from ashes and goat fat. They were quick, quiet, and, perhaps most importantly, non-judgmental. The woman points to a row of linen tunics drying over a smoking brazier. Some are patched, some frayed, all clean. She tells you they belong to a group of street performers who sleep in the tenement upstairs. She washes their costumes twice a week, whether they can pay or not. Sometimes they leave olives or song. One tunic, She says, belongs to a playwright, never wears shoes, always insists his cuffs be ironed with hot stones. Even madness, she whispers, deserves a little starch. You glance at her children. One has slipped and is now sitting in the tub, squealing. The other pours a bit of wine into the rinse water, swearing it makes linen shine like moonlight. Their mother shrugs. Maybe he's right. This kind of laundry is raw, improvisational, full of shortcuts and secrets. You notice a basket of pine cones near the hearth. They use the oils for fragrance. A bundle of dried nettles hangs from the ceiling. Good for wool, she says, keeps the fleas away. Historians rarely mention laundries like this. No inscriptions, no mosaics, no guild records. But you realize, standing here, that these invisible laundresses probably cleaned more garments than all the formal Fulonike combined. They were flexible, fast, and woven into the fabric of neighborhood life. Their clients ranged from street vendors to courtesans to retired legionaries with nothing left but a prayer and a stained tunic. You ask if she ever dreams of owning a real Fulonika. She laughs. Too many rules, she says. And then I'd have to stop using wine. You smile. Rome needs her just like it needs the senator's polished hem and the vestal's spotless stola. She's a softer stitch in the city's grand quilt, a quieter kind of alchemist. You look around one last time, the basin steaming, the tub sloshing, the children giggling, the scent of smoke and something herbal and strangely comforting. You thank her. She nods, already focused on the next tunic. As you leave, you feel the warmth of their tiny fire on your back. This isn't a Rome of arches or aqueducts. This is the Rome of rooms, tiny flickering spaces where transformation happens with every scrub, every stomp, every shared laugh. And for the first time tonight, you feel not like a guest in the empire, but a neighbor. The streets are nearly empty now. Just you, the soft pat of your sandals and the breath of Rome. That ever-present blend of stone, smoke, lavender, and something warmer. You keep walking, drawn by instinct more than direction, until the city seems to thin out around you. That's when you see it. Tucked just beyond the forum, half buried in ivy and moonlight, stands a ruin that most Romans don't even notice anymore. A low wall half fallen, and beyond it the bones of an old Fulonica, one of the oldest still partially standing. This isn't a shop. It's a monument, a fossil of fabric. You step over the cracked threshold and into a space that once echoed, with splashes and stomps. Now it's silent, peaceful. A breeze slips between the broken tiles, and the moon filters down like spilled milk. To your surprise, the tubs are still here. Shallow stone vats, worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. A few rusted tools rest nearby, abandoned as if their owner simply walked off one evening and never came back. There's even a faded fresco on the far wall, two men dancing with their arms around bundles of cloth, joyfully absurd. You smile. It's strange, isn't it, to feel nostalgia for a life you've never lived. This place was once a community center, a hub where gossip was traded faster than laundry, a place where someone's tunic might share space with a thief's, a priest's, or a merchant's, where boots dried beside sandals, and everyone smelled the same after a long day. And yet now it's quiet. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the rhythmic squelch of feet in ammonia, the chatter of children filling basins, the laughter of someone retelling a joke for the fifth time, a sneeze from too much chalk dust, the thwack of a tunic being wrung out and slapped against a rack. This wasn't just a workplace. It was a witness to Rome's heartbeat. When the city celebrated, the Fulonica laundered the wine-stained cloaks. When it mourned, the workers scrubbed funeral garb with quiet hands. They were never the center of the story, but they were always there, stamping it out, folding it, drying it. You walk to the edge of one vat and look in. There's nothing but moonlight and dust, yet somehow it still smells faintly of lye and clay, like the memory of labor lingers in the pores of the stone. Historians might call this site unremarkable. There are no gilded statues, no buried treasure, just tubs, tools, and ghosts. But to you it feels like the most honest part of Rome. Unpolished, unfiltered, necessary, because no matter how grand the empire became, someone had to do the laundry. Someone had to stomp the dirt, to wring out the sweat, to make sure the empire looked as glorious as it claimed to be. You reach out and touch the rim of one of the tubs. The stone is cool beneath your fingers, still solid, still here. Like so many fullers before you, you lean forward just slightly and imagine what it might have been like to step in, to add your feet to the history, to leave nothing behind but cleaner cloth and a bit more order. And maybe in this strange, quiet moment, you already have. You leave the ruins slowly, one foot echoing after the other, and Rome stretches out before you once more, timeless, layered, like a dream made of bricks and breath. But you're not ready to go home yet, not just yet. You follow the curve of a path that dips gently toward the river, the Tiber glinting faintly ahead like a ribbon of dark silk. On its banks you find a row of shops shuttered for the night, fishermen's stalls, wine cellars, and squeezed in between them like a secret, a linen merchant. Its wooden shutters are cracked just enough for moonlight to peek in, and beside, the door sits a crate labeled with a painted dolphin, Delphina linorum, a mark known by Roman fullers far and wide. You peer inside and spot bolts of uncut linen, bundles of wool, and a ledger. Curious, you flip it open. It's filled with notes from different Folonike across the city. Client, Gaius Flavius Tunic, bloodstained, requested herbal rinse. Paid 2 denarii. Client, Poppaea secunda. Stola, wine spill. Gentle scrub only. Silk blend. Partial payment. Saffron oil. Client, unknown soldier. 2 cloaks lice-infested. Leave in sun 3 days. No charge. Gifted for festival. Each line is a life. Each smudge of ink a whisper. This merchant is more than a supplier. She's the lifeline for Rome's laundry trade. She sells the raw materials, yes, but she also collects news. Knows who's laundering for whom. Which clients are stingy. Which fullers owe debts. Who's secretly adding chalk to make tunics look whiter than they are. In a way, she's laundering reputations too. You imagine her in the morning, bustling between vats and bolts, her apron heavy with sample swatches, shouting prices over the clang of buckets. She doesn't just sell linen. She helps fabricate the illusion of Rome's cleanliness, because no matter how many times a garment is stomped, scrubbed, perfumed, and pressed, it begins its life here, unformed, raw, waiting to be shaped, and there's something oddly poetic about that. The fullers you've met, Lucius, Follicula, the mother in the alley, they all take what starts here and give it meaning. They dye it, stitch it, stamp it with someone else's story. You trace a finger along a roll of cloth. It's rough, coarse, and smells faintly of smoke. It'll never be a senator's toga, maybe a stable boy's tunic, maybe a curtain for a market stall. But one day it will return here, creased, dirty, tired, and the fullers will begin again. Historians often write about Rome's great cycles, power, conquest, decay, rebirth. But standing here with cloth still waiting to become, you realize there are smaller cycles too. A tunic is bought, worn, soiled, cleaned, worn again, repaired, and eventually cut into rags. And even then, the rags are used to clean someone else's life. Nothing truly disappears in Rome. It just changes hands and shape and smell. You close the ledger gently, careful not to wake the ghosts inked into its pages. As you step back from the crate, you feel the breeze from the river lift the edge of your cloak, and for just a moment you smell everything. The ammonia, the lavender, the wax, the iron tang of fresh linen, the scent of a city laundering not just its clothes, but itself again and again. The wind shifts softly now, brushing your face like the edge of a warm bedsheet just folded. Rome exhales, and so do you. You follow the riverbank a little further until the lamps disappear entirely, replaced by the silver hush of moonlight dancing on dark water. This final stretch of your journey is quiet, not in the absence of sound, but in the presence of peace. The city still hums behind you, sure. Taverns murmuring, dogs yawning, night watchmen shuffling in sandals. But here, beside the water, you feel like you've stepped outside of time, and maybe that's fitting, because in this final hour, with all the Foloniki behind you, you begin to reflect not just on what the Romans did with their laundry, but what it meant. They didn't just clean garments. They erased battles, they reset days, they gave people the illusion of a fresh start. even if only until the next stain. You think of Lucius stomping silently in his vat, of Follicula brushing prayer into sacred hems, of the children who played in tubs and the mother who pressed wrinkles out with a kiss on the forehead. You remember the wealthy, the powerful, those who never set foot inside a laundry but owed their polished presence to its rituals. The irony that emperors, priests and orators stood atop stages built, however quietly, on the work of stompers and scrubbers. Historians still debate which institutions truly held Rome together: the Senate, the legions, the aqueducts. But after a night like this, you start to believe the answer is simpler. Maybe it was the Fullenica, that unglamorous, clumsy, glorious institution. The place where humanity was scrubbed raw and handed back, folded neatly. Even now, as sleep tugs gently at your thoughts, you can still feel it: the splash of water against stone, the slap of wet cloth, the soft drag of a brush along a toga's edge. And suddenly you don't think of laundry as labor anymore. You think of it as rhythm, as ritual, as a lullaby hummed by a city to itself. And so you settle into the calm, imagining the empire drifting gently to sleep, its clothes clean and cooling on the line. Somewhere, a fuller yawns. A basin empties. A child dreams of silk. And the moon, silent, shining perfectly white, smiles down like a toga hung across the heavens. Now slow your breathing. Let your shoulders fall. Let Rome fade into the background, one scent, one footstep, one softly swaying sheet at a time. There's nothing more to do tonight. No more stains to scrub. Just this gentle hush. This ancient rhythm, this shared silence. You're clean, you're warm, you're home.